Hi guys, I'm Jenna, also known as Ayala13. Welcome to my hobby. Today we're going to be going through the basics of miniature prep, which is all of the work you need to do to the model before you start putting paint on it. And it does sound like a lot of no fun, but it will make your miniature painting last longer to prevent chipping. This video is aimed more at beginner level painters, but even an intermediate level painter may learn something new. So let's get started. This is a sprue. It contains all of the pieces of the miniature during the casting process, and before you put your model together you're going to need to remove these pieces. So do not push or twist the pieces out with your bare fingers, because you may damage the model and you will probably leave a piece of the sprue behind. See that? We're going to need to remove that again anyway. You can use your hobby knife to cut the pieces out. Just be very careful that you do not damage the model or yourself. That was way more difficult than it needed to be. I think the best way to remove the miniature pieces from the sprue is to use a pair of clippers. Now you want to make sure that your modeling clippers have a fine point to be able to get in to all those close details, and this flat side here, so you can go right up next to the miniature. Line up the flat side of your clippers next to the model, and a gentle squeeze. It's very difficult to do with the camera in the way. We'll get the model out with only a little bit of this mess behind. Focus. Only a little bit of this mess behind that needs to be trimmed up later. The next step is to remove the mold lines. Unless your miniature was 3D printed, they are going to come with a fine seam along each piece of the model, which was made when the model was pressed between the two halves of the mold. So a seam is formed around the outside. But hold on a second, why do we even need to bother with removing the mold lines? It's a common question that's asked, especially by beginners. After all, removing them is a pain, and we just want to get around to painting. The answer is you don't. They're your miniatures, so you can do what you like with them. But leaving them on is unsightly, it's considered amateurish, and in my opinion, they spoil the look of the model. Often, I'm asked to give feedback about a miniature. If there is a mold line visible, that will be the first thing that I notice, and it really brings down, detracts from how well the rest of the paint job is. And so my reasoning is, if you're going to put all this effort into trying to improve your painting and make your miniature beautiful, why let yourself down? Some beginners start with sandpaper. I find that way too difficult to get in there. I exclusively use sandpaper. If my model isn't sitting flat, you can just grab the base and smooth it out. I recommend that you invest in a fine set of miniature files. They usually come in a set of 3. The flat file is very good for removing mold lines from wide, flat areas, like so. The round file is very good for getting into concave surfaces, like so. And my favorite, the triangular file, is good for lining up next to an edge that you don't want to ruin with another file. Now you want to go back and forth perpendicular to the line so that you can just scrub it away, like so. Now some plastic miniatures don't like to be filed, and the miniature will go a little bit fluffy when you try to do it. You can still remove this, it's just a little bit more effort. These miniatures might be better off suited to removing the mold line with a hobby knife. Take care when using your hobby knife that you don't damage yourself. You want to just scrape along the mold line, just lifting it up like that. Or you can try to cut into the mold line, but be very careful that you don't cut away the detail of the model. Another way that you can handle mold lines that I'm going to cover later on when I'm talking about gap filling is you can use liquid green stuff to fill up the gap instead of trying to get rid of it. Please make sure your blade is extremely sharp. I know it sounds counterintuitive, but you're actually a lot safer with a sharp blade than with a dull blade. The reasoning is, if you have a dull blade, you're having to push harder with more pressure to make it cut. And then you have way more chance of it slipping, and when it does slip, way more chance of you cutting into your hand with more force. So please keep your blade sharp and do not rest your thumb or finger on the top of the blade. Now another option is Games Workshop has a tool called a Citadel mold line remover, which I have not personally tried. So if you have tried it, please let me know. But basically a blunt blade with a rounded tip, which I think limits its use. It's not going to be able to get into all those nooks and crannies. Additionally, I don't think it's going to be able to work on metal, but Games Workshop doesn't deal with metal anymore. They haven't done metal miniatures in a few years, so not an issue if you're doing Games Workshop products, but if you're interested in other miniature lines, you probably just want to stick to a hobby blade instead. If you're just starting out with Games Workshop miniatures, then I thoroughly recommend their plastic glue. It bonds extremely well. It actually melts the plastic pieces together, so you could throw it at the wall and I doubt it'll break. It also has a long working time, so if you're not quite happy with the way the miniatures pieces are put together, you can alter them for a little bit before it's set. However, it will only work on their plastic, so it won't work on metals and it won't work on some types of other plastic resin combinations. So you will need to use super glue for those. Now, a lot of people when they're starting out want to get a cheap super glue. You can do that, just get one from the hardware store, but make sure that first of all it doesn't damage your models, doesn't leave behind a thick, nasty residue. I prefer this stuff, Zap-A-Gap. I like it because it dries extremely thin so it doesn't obscure the detail, and it dries extremely fast. So I don't have to sit there holding the pieces for 5 minutes and then my hands get tired and I let go and it's falling apart. Blowing on the miniature as it's drying can speed up the glue because the super glue will absorb the moisture from your breath. Also, you can put it in the fridge and increase the shelf life. Some models have tags designed to go into these slaughter bases. Now, if the tag doesn't fit, there's a few things you can do to fix that. If the tag is too wide, you can widen your gap in the slaughter base. Very carefully, using your modeling tool, just cut the inside of the tab until it's wide enough for your miniature to fit. If, however, the slot is too wide and your miniature doesn't fit snugly, you can use your clippers or pliers and just give it a very slight kink in the base. I'm not trying to cut into it, I'm just trying to make that tab a little bit crooked so that it will fit more snugly. Not quite yet, a bit more, like so. Now it's crooked. If your model doesn't come with a slot, you may want to consider pinning the model to its base, which I'll talk about in a later video. When gluing models, remember that less is more. Super glue doesn't stick to itself very well, so if you flood your miniature with super glue, not only may you obscure some of the fine details, you'll also prevent the glue from working as well as it should have. So very, very fine layer. I'll give it a few seconds. Zap-A-Gap is fast. This video is starting to run a little long, so I'm going to divide it into 2 parts. Please check out part 2 where we'll be talking about how to fix miniatures that come bent during transportation, how to clean the mold residue off of a miniature, and also how to properly prime, which is a mistake that a lot of expert level painters can make. Likes, shares, and comments are appreciated. See you next time.